Welcome. Welcome today, everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching live or if you watch later, and thank you all of you that are here live with us. Today, Lisa, Lori, and Cheryl, thanks for being here. And, April is Stress Awareness Month, which is one of my favorite months, of course, because stress is my thing, not personally, but, professionally speaking. Although, personally, I deal with stress just like everybody else too. And, have learned how to work it basically. And so I'm going to share my screen. And I was kind of thinking about, what might be a great way to start, the beginning part of a stress awareness month. It's also alcohol awareness month, by the way. So that's another important piece. Yeah, being a substance use counselor and, having talked a little bit about um, some of my own concerns with that, this is also a great time to kind of give consideration with those aspects. Okay, let me just make sure that my screen is available to you. I'm gonna put my presenter view. And so, what I wanted to do is just kind of present a holistic model of stress. And I've kind of talked about this model, and I may have presented it when we first started the podcast, but it seemed like, this month starting off, being only the second day of Stress Awareness Month, a good time to review it and talk about it. And then really, dive a little deeper into taking your own inventory of stress and what kind of assessments you might want to look at to start inventorying stress symptoms, what things kind of stress you out, and looking at different options to take these inventories, and then what do you do with this information? How can you utilize the information that you gather, and then what options are available to you with it? Because it's one thing, to collect data or to have a proof of, how stressful you might be and what is stressful to you. And then, the opposite side of that kind of pendulum is, well, where do you go from there? And a lot of times what I've heard when working with individuals and even with students that I work with, I taught a stress class. I was saying right before we started recording that I was teaching a stress class this weekend. So it's just a stress intensive class where we meet all Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the whole focus is basically on stress and just learning about it and getting a lot of different strategies and experiencing these different strategies to really start applying them and implementing them. And so a lot of times when I work with students or with clients or even just talking in general presentations and whatnot, there's this kind of disconnect that occurs when people have this information. They don't really know necessarily how to manage it or how to kind of like, what do I do with this stuff? Like, okay, I know I'm stressed out. I know my level of stress is really high, but it doesn't feel like I have control. And one of the biggest messages that I've heard after, we kind of talk about things that they have recognized is that you do have a lot more control over your stress than you realize. And that is essentially what recognizing what your stressors are about and what kind of symptoms you experience. That is really that awareness is really one of the first steps in figuring out how to get that control. And so here is some basic definitions again. So stress, as I've mentioned before, is really the body, essentially the body's way of adapting or adjusting or accommodating to a perceived or a real threat or demand that's occurring in the moment or long term. And, I talked about before how these can be internal or they could be external. And somehow, the body is trying to either make room for this kind of perception of a demand or a threat, or is adjusting to it or accommodating it. And that means like even like the flight fight. If there's a real threat to your life, for example, your body is going to adapt to that. And it is going to say, yeah, this is probably a really good situation to run or to fight, right? It's not going to be like thinking through logically things to do. It's actually just a split moment, just, kind of reaction that happens. And so when we talk about taking an inventory, we're looking at a detailed list of all the things in a place. And so when we're applying an inventory, taking an inventory, we're looking at, what's the inventory of your stressors, the kinds of internal or external things that are stressing you out, or the inventory of your symptoms. And one of the initial things to keep in mind with this is that you're not going to know every single stressor that you experience and every single sign and symptom of your experience initially, if this is something that's new for you. And that's because oftentimes we don't really realize what may be stressing us out until we sit with it, and actually kind of think about it and recognize that, yeah, maybe this is causing me a little bit more stress than I knew that it was. And so it really is about just kind of cultivating that awareness to these different things and recognizing the impact that these things are having upon our bodies, upon our thought processes, our emotions, and then subsequently how that affects the behaviors that we are demonstrating to others and how we're coping with these different kinds of things. And then we have an assessment, which is the act of judging or deciding the amount, value, quality, or importance of something. And so this is a judgment or a decision that is made, basically, which is an assessment. You're assessing, you're making a judgment or a decision about a particular thing. And in this case, it's going to be about your level of stress, about the different stressors that exist, or about the different signs and symptoms that you may be experiencing. And so this is a holistic model of stress, and it combines, Western and Eastern approaches. And I, wrote this book back in 2017, which explains this model. It combines the chakras, from an Eastern perspective, and then also, provides the evidence-based practices from a Western perspective to supplement a lot of these different concepts, because some people don't like a lot of the evasive types of approaches that may exist in Western approaches, even though there are evidence-based. And yet from an energetic system of medicine, that's what the chakras really embrace and embody, is that we're looking at it from an energy perspective. And so, really looking at this kind of holistic model, the idea is recognizing that at the root of the system is your brain, which is also the root chakra. And this is, the foundational level that kind of sets up every other system that is the next level. So one level is built upon the other. And we see this in Western approaches, how thoughts are also built from how the brain is, because the way the brain functions is going to influence the way the thought processes occur and how the mind works, and it influences the emotions, et cetera, et cetera. And so from a brain perspective and from an energetic perspective, we're really looking at, if the brain is not organically whole and healing and allowed the space that it needs to heal and flow from an energetic perspective, it does set up kind of this system where things are going to be very different in terms of how is stress perceived, what it's going to be reacting to, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a really great video that I shared, over this weekend that talked about how, and it kind of applies to all the other levels, but it shared, there was this researcher who I'm forgetting her name right now, but she talked about the research that she's been doing over the past 25 years and discovered that emotions are not something that are built into our brain. they're just built, is what she says. And what that means is that emotions and the way that our brain works is that our brain is wired to make predictions, to make guesses based on past experiences. And so when we find ourselves in a situation, the brain is working to organize material and systems and information in order to predict what's going to happen. And we know this is how the brain works because we know that the brain likes to have the least effort possible. And so it organizes information to take. This is what habits are about. This is what, distorted patterns of thinking are about. These are all ways that allow the brain to not use up so much energy and so much time and effort because it's like a shortcut. And at the same time, what it does is that it's not always accurate of what's happening in the environment. And so if we're depending and we're relying on what our brain is telling us without recognizing that sometimes it may not be accurate, and we need to look at other cues in the environment and also within ourselves about that, that it may be setting us up in some sort of way. And so that's one way of looking at that. And then the emotions is the second part. This is the second chakra. And really looking at how emotions, are very fluid and they are not concrete. So they do ebb and flow. They get very intense sometimes and then they fade away. And when we have some kind of recognition of where our emotional regulation is at, the idea with this is recognizing too that sometimes we are going to be more emotional with certain stressors than others because of different perceptions, different thoughts, different cues in the environment that are also attached in our brain. We have thoughts, which is the third level. This is really the center of our esteem as well from an energy perspective. It also is about our creativity, how we identify ourselves, and also just kind of how we perceive certain uh, willingness, goals, things like that, different concepts per se. And the idea with thoughts is that thoughts can be distorted very easily. And many people probably are very familiar with this. Like one typical example, especially from a stress perspective, is when people have these kind of, blanket overgeneralizations. I always find myself in this situation, right? Like that always word is an overgeneralization because chances are you are not always in that situation. It is not 100% of the time. And so that is essentially kind of this prediction thing that the brain does because it's a shortcut. It's a way to add more stress to your perception of something that is not accurate. And so when we look at the thoughts that we're having and how they may be contributing to our experience of stress, the idea is that we could recognize some patterns that may be increasing that perception of stress and strategically figure out, okay, what are some things that maybe can help lessen this experience? We also have these bodily sensations, which is the fourth level. And this is in the chakra system, the heart level and the connector level, as it's known. So it's really connecting the brain or the root chakra, the emotional, the sacral, and the solar plexus levels, which are more of the lower vibrational levels and more about self-preservation and about the self. So the heart chakra really is that kind of bridge to this kind of other side, so to speak, the higher vibrational side. And if you think about it, these bodily sensations, Western approaches, we're becoming more somatic and more attuned to listening and focusing to our bodies. There's a lot more approaches nowadays that have been coming out that talk about somatic approaches and intuitive eating, for example, and yoga and, animal assisted therapy, which really focuses on attunement with an animal due to cues that you're mirroring. And so the idea with this is that you're really recognizing how sensations can be very different experiences as well, that they can be signals for physical aspects like fatigue or hunger, or they could be cues about having more information that needs to be looked at or providing you information with something. There's different approaches that exist in psychology and counseling that talk about ways of doing this. And also there's been different approaches that expand upon the concept that oftentimes when energy is stuck in the body, it stays stuck in the body and it tends to disrupt the natural flow of what's happening. And so it doesn't, when we hold on to an emotion, for example, that's energy that kind of like maybe staying in our bodies and thus interrupts the natural flow of that energy that may want to go somewhere or be expressive or whatnot. And so these bodily sensations that we experience can be a lot of different things that we may not perceive them to be, only because we don't know and we don't have that information. And I love the interpretation of the chakra system of what a level 4 is. It basically means unstruck. And so it's kind of like this, when I think of unstruck, the word, what comes to my mind is like this new spring day, like it's just untouched. And, there's this kind of like blank slate. There's no kind of association with past experiences or with, anything that might come about. You're just allowing yourself to see what is as it is. And so the fifth level, which is in the chakra system about the throat, this is the throat chakra. This is about communication, yet it's also about our ability for expression and how we communicate with others. This can involve our environment. So if you think about like the kind of work that we do for a living is an expression of who we are, how we communicate with other people, how we, take care of our living space or our office space, or, how we engage with people around us. Do we speak up when something doesn't sit right with us? Those are all parts of the fifth level. And then the sixth level, which is the third eye, is this kind of like the connection with a higher purpose, or the connection with the universe. It's tuition, clear thinking. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with intuition. And when we think about on this kind of pendulum, this is really the opposite of your brain, which is very concrete and very in reality or a distorted reality, depending on how your brain operates. But the idea is recognizing that there's this kind of abstractness with this third eye, the crown, or the third eye chakra, because there's this intuitive part or this value-based perception where we don't really know what kindness looks like, but we can describe it and we can do things that make us feel like we're being kind, or we can point it out in other people, or we could say, well, this is kind and this isn't. Well, how do you describe the difference? Like that's kind of a very abstract concept. And so really trying to make the abstract more concrete is one way of being able to embody that more third eye, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So that's kind of like the holistic model, and really recognizing how all of these different levels are part of the stress experience for a lot of people. And when doing an assessment or looking at stress or signs or symptoms, these are all different levels that are going to come about for people. And I'm going to talk really quickly about some of these. So these are different stress assessments that are out there. There are so many different stress assessments that are out there. These are just 3 examples that exist, from the American Institute of Stress, the International Stress Management Association, the Stress Management Society in America, and the International Stress Management Association I really like this association personally, just because I was a member of it and also was the membership chair of it many years ago. But I also know like how they worked and the kind of work that they did. And so that is, from just personal experience, why I put it up there. Keep in mind that, these assessments are ones that you could do yourself. They're kind of like a checklist. And what they do is that they kind of provide some information. Now, I use another kind of assessment. I call it a holistic stress log. And I modified a mood thought log that I learned about in my training years ago. Of course, I put the year up here, and that really, I don't know why I did that, because that kind of gives it away about how long ago it's been, but whatever, it's okay. So this is like the first edition of this book when it first came out, really popular book. And from a cognitive behavioral perspective, focusing on thoughts and connection to behaviors and feelings, very popular book when it first came out. And so they do have this kind of mood thought mood log that has been very much the prime focus of cognitive behavioral therapy, and looking at this kind of how your thoughts influence your mood and then subsequently your behaviors. And so what I did is I kind of modified that a little bit to really look at the whole experience of stress and really focus on these different levels and gather data and information about these different levels. So really looking at, okay, what is the situation that you're in? Let's look at this situation and get some details. What are the specific thoughts that you're having, that's going through your mind? What are the emotions that you're experiencing? And I have a bunch of different, feelings and emotions that are listed. What are physiological sensations that are occurring? And then there's some sensations like, is your heart beating fast? Are you having sweaty palms? Do you feel tension in your headache? Are your, your redness in your face or a flushed face? Do you feel tension in your back? Do you feel like your ears are burning? Those are different physiological sensations. What was the outcome of the situation? Did you have a reaction or did you respond to it? What values for yourself are reflected here? Like if there is a value that the person maybe has, that they are aware of their values, if this is an activity that we've done together or not, we would come back to it. If the behavior, the thought, and the emotion aligns with their life values, and then I have them rate their stress levels, their pain levels, that's physical pain, and any urges or cravings that they might have for engagement with substance use or indulgence with like food or any other kind of potentially addictive behavior. And so once somebody, does this kind of log, that gives us a lot of really great information to kind of look at different things from that. And of course, it doesn't feel very great in the moment, because it's like, oh, I'm writing all this down on these situations that I'd rather just avoid and not think about. Because I know I went through this when I first did this too, many, many years ago. And yet at the same time, it was helpful, to know what was going on as well. And so once you have these different assessments, whether you take this kind of like online assessment, there are different ways that you can do these things. So, with assessments, you can do them in the moment, like as you are experiencing stress, which is what mindfulness is about. In the moment, what's the awareness that's occurring at the moment that I'm experiencing the duress or the distress? Or when you are recognizing that, oh, right now might be a really good time to just kind of assess what's going on. Or you could do a daily assessment. Many of these different assessment tools can be done daily, like the mood thought log or the modified stress log is one that can be done daily. Some of the other assessment examples that I provided can be done daily, and people can do them like at a specific time during the day, or if they're experiencing distress during the day, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, but maybe they're having a stressful experience at work. And so they want to do the assessment to kind of see, okay, these are the symptoms I'm experiencing right now, or these are the stressors related to this particular experience. Or maybe it's, a distressful situation at home or an interaction with a friend or whatever it may be. Or it might be that a person may decide to do a summary of the day, and just kind of assess overall what their day was like by answering these questions from that perspective. And then, of course, there's the weekly option where people might decide to take a specific day of the week, and just kind of overview their week of what it was look like. And some options that exist of that was, is to, I'm going to do it during this week of the month because I have a lot more things going on. I think it might be more particularly stressful because of this. Or, I know this situation is something I've been really wanting to know more information about. That's when I want to do the assessment. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do assessments. It's not just, oh my gosh, I have to do it exactly when somebody tells me to. You have so many options about when to assess for different pieces of information. The idea is recognizing that is in your control, is when you decide to do it. And the flexibility of having those options gives you an opportunity then to gather data from a lot of different vantage points. So when things are going well, when things are not going well, and then you get this kind of more accurate reflection of different things that are happening. And then, of course, the outcomes for these assessments with the online assessments, usually there's going to be a scored value assigned to it. And so it gives you some direct information about what your stress level is. So like with the assessments that I listed a few slides ago, once you answer these questions and you tally up your score, it lets you know kind of what your quote unquote stress level is according to their assessment tool. And it will tell you, according to your score, you have a high stress level, or you have a moderate stress level, or a low stress level, or you have these kinds of things that are going on for you. With the modified stress log, it's something really to review with a neutral third party, preferably with a trained professional who understands this. Any counselor or trained professional in the mental health field understands a lot of the different approaches related to that. And it's really about observing patterns and connecting dots. I mean, that's what the modified stress log allows for too. It's because you have a lot of information with that. And then what are the options that you have once you get all that information? You have so many options. This is the exciting part. I mean, well, at least for me. I mean, I get so excited when this happens because I'm just like, oh my gosh, look at all these different things that you can do with this. And most people don't share that excitement because they just don't want to experience the stress, right? I mean, who wants to experience that? And at the same time, it's important to recognize that you do need a little bit of stress in your life, maybe even a little bit more than a little, because stress can be motivating. It can be challenging, and it can provide that kind of like oomph that you may need to move forward. So these are the different options that you have. Is this something that you could change related to your stressor? Is it something that you can accept? Is it something that you can let go of? There's lots of different ways that you can do any of those three things. Different kinds of counseling and psychology approaches fit here. There are lots of different somatic approaches as well. Any trained professional can help with that. And that's what support is about, is looking for emotional support, motivational or encouragement. There's lots of support groups, that can address these things, family, friends, that might be going through the same thing or have gone through it and can share their experience with you. And behavioral change, I think this is a really important thing, is that most of us do want to change certain things that we do. And we also need to recognize that change does not occur overnight. It is a process. It is not an event. It is about the journey, not the destination. It's about what you're doing to get there and not about getting there. And it is, it can be a very impatient process too. And so it's not linear. There are going to be a lot of, going back 2 steps, when you're making progress and things like that. But really great examples of behavioral change are individuals who are in recovery from substance use disorders, from mental health disorders, from medical disorders, people that manage diabetes or heart disease. Those are all different ways that people are in recovery because they've made different changes in their life that have caused them stress and been able to find a balance with that. And so, stress awareness month, again, like I said, it is all of April, every single day in April till the end of the month. And so you can optimize how you respond to stress. There are many different resources available, and there are many free resources as well. I do have some free resources on my website as well. So you're welcome to go to my website, and there is a tab, that does indicate additional and free resources. And there's some articles and some lists there as well. There are lots of relaxation videos and podcasts, shifting your perspective, communicating effectively, being vulnerable, cultivating awareness. Those are all different things that can be done. So that's the idea with stress, holistic stress, and also taking an assessment. And so, I know we have maybe a minute left, if that. I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions or comments that they wanted to share before we end.
I would just like to say real quickly, years ago when I was teaching psychology, we had, of course, a chapter on stress. And bottom line, in one sentence, I think that chapter could be summed up that what it was saying was that stress, yes, of course, it's important, but what is most important is how we cope with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, yeah.
Thought of that a couple of times as you've been talking. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't have the tools or the know-how about how to cope with it, that's what makes it much, much harder too.
Right.
I completely agree. All right. Anyone else have any last comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I just want to say that I really loved the holistic model.
Oh, it's
I've never
great.
seen something like that. That's pretty thorough. So I took a snapshot of it. Like, this is going to come in handy.
Oh, wonderful. Great. And I can also send you the slides if you will find that useful. Yeah. And you can always request the slides. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to send, any material that I use or go over, like I said, my info is your info. I am happy to share what I know. So, all right. Well, I appreciate all of you being here today. And again, if anybody who watches this or who is live has any questions or has a topic idea, our next podcast is going to be April 16th. So it's still Stress Awareness Month. I will be talking and bringing another topic related to stress awareness for you. So have a great rest of your evening. And Erica, thanks for joining. I just saw you. So thanks for being here, everyone.
Hey, I'll see you later. Thanks.
Right.
Bye. Thank you.
All right.